Hey everyone, Art Burns here, wishing you well today. So I wanted to follow up on what we were talking about yesterday with the programming that we're all kind of subject to. From the first 7 years of our lives, we're kind of programmed to sort of process everything the way that we're going to process it for the rest of our lives. Now, again, this does not mean that we're completely beholden to this. This is changeable, which is a good thing, right? But generally speaking, for the first 7 years of our lives, we kind of build this foundation. We kind of construct, as I like to call it, a prism through which all of our experiences are going to come, right? And we do this by absorbing the things that are around us, right? The way that we see our parents interact with each other, that kind of, defines how we interact with other people. We see how, the teachers teach us, or treat us rather. That's generally how we will treat other people in sort of, not familial situations. We also are constantly exposed to social paradigms on the schoolyard and in the playgrounds. And of course, then there's media and there's sports and all kinds of things. So in the first 7 years, what we're doing is we're just absorbing this stuff like a sponge. We're just kind of again creating what I like to think of as a prism. You could call it a filter, you could call it a program, but this is what we're kind of everything we experience comes through this foundation of our experiences, of our understanding of the world and the way that we relate to the world, right? But here's the thing. Our programming, especially as it relates to the stress response in our body and our tendency towards the stress response in our body, it starts even sooner than that. How could it start before we're born, you say? Well, it does. And it starts actually even before our parents are born. Okay, let me explain that. So there's fairly recent science and studies of cortisol. Okay, cortisol is the stress hormone, and that's the thing that initiates the stress response in our body. That's the thing that kicks our body into high gear of hyperarousal. Right, our blood pressure, our heart rate, and our respiratory system are all sped up. As a result of cortisol. Not only cortisol, but also adrenaline, norepinephrine. But cortisol is considered the stress hormone. Right. And so there is recent studies about cortisol in human beings that show that when your parents, when your mother, specifically your mother, although it does count into your father too, when your mother was pregnant with you, right? Depending on how much stress she experienced and how much the cortisol in her body was active, right? So when you go into the stress response, the first thing your body does is it secretes cortisol, right? And that again, that's the thing that speeds everything up, that readies you for the fight or flight response in your body, right? And then from there, a lot of other things happen, but that's the first thing that happens. And so whatever stressors and whatever stress your mother was experiencing while you were in utero, that level of cortisol transmits into you as an embryo. Okay, so therefore, as you grow up, you are going to have a certain baseline of cortisol sort of levels in your body that are going to be, determined by that level of cortisol that your mother was experiencing during her pregnancy. Okay, not only that, as I say, it goes back even further. You can backtrack it one generation further than that because, as you may or may not know, when a female embryo is in utero, right, that female embryo at around 4 or 5 months, I think it's 4 months, it could be five, I could be wrong about that, but at some point during the formation of the embryo, and as the embryo grows inside a woman's womb, that embryo contains, if it's a female embryo, contains all of the eggs that she will ever have in her body. Right, so however many menstrual cycles are going to happen between the onset of puberty and the onset of menopause for a woman, all of those eggs are already formed in the body of the fetus, of the embryo, at about 4 months old, at about 4 months of gestation, right? And so therefore, whatever your grandmother was experiencing in terms of the cortisol levels, right? That translates into your mother's body and then translates into the embryo, into the ovary, the egg that eventually became you. right? And so again, this is pretty recent science. I have a great book you can check out that talks about this. It's fascinating stuff, and it's really really important to understand this stuff. Okay, the book is called "It Didn't Start with You," and if you'd like, just I'll put a link to the book in the comments here because it really really is fascinating, and it's a fantastic book. But the reason I bring this up is because, as I said yesterday, understanding our tendencies, understanding this kind of programming that we go through, right? That we are subject to, right? From everything that we like, that we can experience. I'm sorry, every possible thing that we can experience, we have set up a sort of default position for that since we were very, very young, from age 0 to age 7, right? And understanding those tendencies, understanding that programming, understanding those predispositions that we have are very key to understanding how we are going to react to things, and also key to allowing us to kind of grow away from those things, grow out of them, because that's the thing. This is not a prison sentence, right? This is not something where you have no choice, right? You absolutely have control over this process, but in order to control it, you need to first understand it. You need to bring awareness to it, right? And so to take that a step further, right, to understand your tendencies towards stress, the tendencies, because that's what we're talking about, right? When we're talking about a baseline of cortisol that might be higher for me than it is for you, what that means is that I am more susceptible to the stress response, given certain triggers than you would be, okay? And for me to understand that about myself, it gives me very valuable information which I can use to not only avoid the stress response in my body and to reduce it for the betterment of my health and all of my relationships, right? But it also allows me to kind of see it coming before it actually happens, right? And that's the key, right? When we talk about stress reduction, it's not about reducing stress once you're in the stress response, right? That's no good, because once you're in the stress response, it can take up to 20 minutes to go from your sympathetic nervous system to your parasympathetic nervous system, which is like going from the arousal part of your body to the deceleration, right? And so who has 20 minutes, right, in any given situation, right? By the time you're able to work that out and to get, to reset your body, chances are some level of damage has been done, right? You've either said something you shouldn't have said, you've done something you shouldn't have done, your reactions are going to likely, cause other reactions past that. And that's what we want to avoid. So that's why the key to stress reduction is to manage it before it happens, right? And that's where this comes in really handy. If you know that your mother grew up in a certain way, right, and there was always, say, stress around money, for instance, right, and that every kind of, every time that, that there was money problems, that there were certain stressors in the house and all that kind of stuff, right, that might have also been applied to her mother, right, like when she was pregnant, that kind of stuff, as I explained, right? Like, if you know that, right, and you know that for the first 7 years of your life, money was always an issue, and you know that you have a higher level of cortisol as a baseline than what your mother had, than what other people have, rather, that is according to what your mother had, well, then you know that when the subject of money comes up and you start feeling a certain way, you know where that comes from, right? Now, of course, that's just one very simple example, and to really determine these things, as you can read in this book, or I can certainly help you with figuring out some of these exercises as well, it takes a lot of sort of introspective and self-examination of practices, journaling practices and meditation practices that you can really intentionally do to understand this on a very deep level, right? And it takes that kind of deep understanding to be able to positively affect your ability to avoid the stress that comes through these, that is a result of these different tendencies and prisms and the cortisol level that you picked up from your mom when she was pregnant and your grandma when she was pregnant with your mom, and so anyway, I hope this was helpful for you. I know it's a lot that I covered here. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I would really love to hear from you all. This is important stuff, and it's really important to understand this. And again, I'll post a link to the book down below. It's called "It Didn't Start With You." I the author's name escapes me, but I have it in my bookshelf right next door. So I will post a link to that without a problem. And if you have any questions though in the meantime, please feel free to reach out. I would love to get into helping you and also giving you some of these very simple practices of journaling and ways in which you can bring awareness to this whole process that I talk about. All right. Now, this all equals at the baseline of all this, right, is a level of self-compassion, right? And that's what we want to get to, right? As we're talking about all of these tendencies and these, predispositions and filters and programs, really what this boils down to is that as you're, experiencing things that cause you stress in your life, right, it's really important to give yourself some love, right? To really respect the fact that it didn't start with you. It is not all your fault, right? And as we can develop that sort of self-compassionate attitude towards ourselves, then understanding these things and working with that understanding becomes very, very much more attainable. It's a very, very important process here. And so for that reason, tomorrow I'm going to go over another meditation that I've recorded recently that is a meditation of self-compassion, and I think you're really going to like it. So I can't wait to share that with you. And again, if you have any questions, please hit me up. Really do. All right, everybody, wishing you well. I'll be back again tomorrow. I hope you all saw my cat back there. That's Giles. And I'll be back again tomorrow, and I wish you well. Thanks for listening. Take care.